It's 6.
Versus naturally aspirated V8, reigning Drive Car of the Year category winner.
And we've got here the updated Ram 1500, but of course it's got no V8 anymore. It's got twin turbo 6-cylinder power, but can it actually outgun the big Chev?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll take a look at the cabin's infotainment space in the second row. We'll also drive them around town and on the highway, but you've got one extra trick up your sleeve, mate.
Of course, towing. I've got a big Jayco caravan. I'm going to tow with both of these vehicles to see which has the best powertrain for heavy duty work.
That's right, full size US pickup truck showdown. Let's get into it.
Out of the 2 trim levels available, the Ram 1500 Laramie Sport is the entry level for this new 6-cylinder model. It's priced at $141,950 plus on-road costs, and it's worth pointing out that this Laramie Sport is significantly less expensive than the more powerful and higher spec Limited, which is $159,950 plus on roads. Along with the so-called standard output turbocharged 6-cylinder engine, the Ram 1500 Laramie Sport gets 20-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights, a powered tailgate, and those Ram box lockable side storage bins on each side of the tub. There's also a tub liner, powered side steps, and a tonneau cover. Replacing that long-serving 5.7-litre Hemi V8 is a 3-litre turbocharged petrol inline 6-cylinder. Ram calls it the Hurricane, and it outstrips the old V8 for power and torque. It makes 313 kilowatts and 635 newton meters, and it runs through an 8-speed automatic transmission with on-demand 4-wheel drive, a low-range transfer case, but no locking differential. The Ram 1500 uses independent suspension up front with coil springs at the rear with a 5-link panhard rod setup. Out of these 2 American big rigs, the Chevy Silverado 1500 LTZ is the cheaper option. It's priced at $130,500 plus on-road costs, which makes it a smidgen more than 10 grand less than the Ram. While the Silverado is a large and well-specced chunk of metal, it cannot match the Ram directly in terms of standard kit. Here we've got 20-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights at the front and rear, and a tub liner as standard. There is no tonneau cover or additional trick storage like what you get in the Ram, but the tailgate is powered. The Silverado sticks with a 6.2-litre petrol V8 in this 1500 trim, which has no turbocharging but makes 313 kilowatts, which is exactly the same as the Ram, and only slightly less torque with 624 newton meters. This runs through a 10-speed automatic transmission, and the soundtrack is helped by that dual-mode active exhaust, which is standard fit. Does sound awesome. There's also a low-range transfer case with on-demand 4-wheel drive and a locking rear differential. Unlike the coil-sprung rear end of the Ram, we've got leaf springs here in the Silverado, and that is matched to independent suspension up front. In terms of overall dimensions, the 3,750mm wheelbase of the Silverado is longer than the Ram. You're looking at 3,672 in that case. But despite this fact, the Silverado actually has a slightly better turning circle. You've got a 14.3 meter turning circle versus 14.4 for the Ram. Yes, the Silverado's is better, but neither are particularly good. We've got measurements of both these utes up on the screen now, and you can see that the Silverado is a little bit longer, but the Ram is a bit taller, and in terms of width, there's not a lot in it.
All right, mate, I'll tell you what fascinates me about these trucks. If you take the loyal fan base out, right? Because if you're a Ford fan, you're never going to buy a Chev, you're never going to buy a Ram. If you're a Chev fan, you're not going to buy a Tundra. If you're really...
The decision's made, right?
The decision's made.
Yep.
But if you're brand agnostic, so you're looking now at what constitutes a segment in Australia. One of the things that people talk about all the time is the engines. I want a V8, I want the noise. Well, with the Ram now, that's not an option right now, is it?
Yeah. So Ram really hung its hat on that Hemi 5.7-litre V8 for a long time, but they've stepped away from that and they've got this 6-cylinder, 3-litre turbo, twin turbo, I've got to say, engine. And I mean, it's got turbocharging, of course, so it's going to have broader torque.
Yeah.
It's got more torque than this big V8 actually. So you could argue that it's a better use of technology compared to the V8, but this is still just that, it's that classic choice, right?
Yeah.
Like it's hard to go past.
Put my hand up and say I'm a dinosaur, but I think if I'm buying one, I definitely would prefer the noise of the V8. But having said that, I drive the Ram and I think, wow, that inline six is flexible.
It is. And it's smooth. It hasn't got the same rumble as this, but it does have that 6-cylinder characteristic to it that a lot of people would probably appreciate in its own right. No, it doesn't have bimodal, it doesn't rumble, but this is still a really enjoyable powertrain in this application.
Tell you what, if you're watching now and you're thinking of buying one of these, would the engine make the choice for you? So you've got Silverado out there, a V8, the others that are 6s. Would you buy the Chevy purely because it's got a V8?
Or do you test drive them and just drive, do you prefer what drives better regardless of the cylinders?
Yeah, really good point. Because if you get behind the wheel of this thing, you're not missing out on anything.
No, absolutely not.
Speaking of getting behind the wheel, time for you to get in the interior because there's a bit to get through.
Yes, big cabins. Let's go. The Ram is a big truck with a big asking price, but of course there is a huge amount of standard kit included in this car.
The new 14.4-inch infotainment screen sits front and centre in portrait orientation, and there's also the 10.25-inch screen for the passenger, which crucially the driver can't see. On the subject of the driver, you get a 12-inch customisable screen, which works nicely once you choose your settings. Leather trim, heated and cooled seats, as well as heating and cooling for the outboard seats in the second row, and quality trim throughout, ensure the Ram delivers a luxury experience inside the cabin.
The first thing I want to talk about with this Ram is the infotainment display, because in comparison to the Chevy, which has a horizontal setup, this is a bit more portrait style, similar to a Ford Ranger, I suppose you could say. Now, it's a big display with a lot of functionality going on. I do appreciate the fact, though, that we still have some physical buttons here for controls, because this does take up a lot of the space on the dash. Now, some of the controls are buried slightly in this infotainment display. Not too bad, though. It does work well from a functionality point of view. But if you're a big fan of Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, smartphone mirroring, you are restricted to a relatively small part of this display. You've got this other area down here for widgets. You can do different things there. I would prefer to have a full screen display of what I want to see at times. You don't really get that here. Maybe a small complaint. But one thing that's not small, I've got to say, is this amount of storage space here. So you've got cup holders here, a huge amount of room, and this area here actually opens up, that slides away. I reckon there's about the same amount of litres of storage space in here as you get in the boot of a Suzuki Jimny. It's absolutely huge. There's wireless charging pads there and an embarrassment of riches in terms of power outlets. I can't imagine actually using that many, to be honest with you. And of course, you've got an HDMI port here for that passenger screen. Now, when you turn that on from the driver's seat, I actually can't see it. I can't look over and get distracted by that. There's some really cool technology there, but this front passenger can sit there and do whatever they want. They can even play Nintendo Switch, put on a movie, and while those hours away when you're on that big long road trip. Now, from the driver's seat, as you would expect, this vehicle is hugely comfortable. You've got big broad seats here. This is a right-hand drive conversion, obviously, but from sitting here, you absolutely cannot tell. In terms of the fit and the finish, the materials, this looks like it came out of the factory in this right-hand drive setup. And it does work well, I think. I love the idea of adjustable pedals. That's something that most vehicles don't have. You can really get used to dialing yourself in nicely behind the wheel. And then you've got manual adjustment for the steering column, which does work well also. And we don't have a column shifter anymore either. Neither do we have a big shifter here in the middle. That's good for storage space. You've now got this dial, and that controls your four-wheel drive modes, your low range, and all of that sort of thing. And it does work well actually for getting around town. It's nice and easy to use. But of course, we've got the Chevy here as well. So how is this Ram 1500 in comparison to the Silverado? Now, this Silverado LTZ is a few $1,000s, almost $4,000 actually, cheaper than the Ram 1500, but still it packs a big punch in terms of specs.
Headlining the cabin technology is a 13.4-inch infotainment touchscreen, a colour head-up display, and a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster for the driver. There's also black leather trim, a heated steering wheel, heated and cooled seats, a digital rear view mirror, bed view camera, and an incredible array of storage throughout the cabin, while LED lighting inside the cabin adds to the ambience.
Now, one of the main differences I find with this Silverado in comparison to the Ram is the setup here. So we've got a regular old gear shifter here. The Ram has a dial up on the dashboard, but that means that this isn't as good for storage, I suppose, as the Ram. Now, I'm not going to say it's bad for storage because it's still massive and you've still got a lot of room here, cup holders. The materials are relatively hard wearing here, I suppose, not exactly luxury, but I think it works for filling this car up with stuff. It is a ute, don't forget. And you've still got a whole lot of storage in this center console here. There's power outlets there, there's a wireless charging pad, and this little cubby that pops in and out. So you're not going to run out of space per se, I think. And another thing to note here, while the Ram does have a nice screen in front of the passenger there, this hasn't got that, but it does have a second glove box, which I suppose is handy and useful just for putting stuff in. So maybe not as practical in that regard as the Ram, but there are some things I do like. And because we've got a more landscape style infotainment display, we've actually got room for buttons on the dashboard, a little bit more here than we did in the Ram. So we've got the full complement here of climate control buttons. There's USB and USB-C there, but just having physical controls for this works. I think it makes sense. And then you've got more buttons here for some of your driving controls, even one button to wind down all the windows at once, which is a pretty handy feature actually. And the infotainment, I think I prefer this over the Ram personally because of the orientation layout. You get to use more of the screen for single controls. It's a little bit easier to get around and figure out where things are. It's a bit simpler in the layout, I suppose. Both are excellent in this regard, I have to say. But from personal preference, I like this. Now, sitting behind the wheel here, the seat is very comfortable. This is a very nice and easy car to drive, aside from the size, obviously. But one thing we are missing here is the adjustable pedal position, which is a great thing to have in the Ram. I do like it, but at the same time, I've got adjustment through the steering column here, which is electric. I've got good adjustment through the seat, so I can actually get quite comfortable behind the wheel of this car. So in terms of the driver and how well they're taken care of, this is still quite excellent. Now you can see that the Ram's cabin is a bit glitzier overall in terms of the materials and the seats and that sort of thing. And it does have an advantage of improved storage around this center console area, but this still does the job quite well. It's still got plenty of bells and whistles, and I do prefer the layout of this dashboard here and the buttons and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of horses for courses going on there, I suppose, in terms of what you might prefer.
Now back here in the second row of the Ram, have a look at the amount of space I've got. It's fair to say that this is one of the strong points of these vehicles. When we test them, it's one of the things we love about them more than anything. So an enormous amount of room. That's Sam's driving position there. It's like I'm sitting in business class on a expensive train journey or on a plane. It is crazy how much room I have here. The seats themselves are pretty comfortable. The base isn't flat like a bench, so you do sit into it a little bit. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the second row of these when we're doing testing on longer drives, and they are comfortable. So they work well in terms of long distance road trips. In terms of amenity for the people who are back here, there's obviously a hell of a lot of storage and functionality. So there are 2 USB-A, 2 USB-C ports there. You get heated outboard seats as well. You've got cup holders or bottle holders up here. You've also got another 2 here in this fold down armrest. There's some storage in there as well. Huge sunroof lets a lot of light in. There's also a lot of headroom as well, which I think makes a difference. And then of course, pockets in the back of the seats and double storage in the doors, 2-layer storage there in the doors. So I think, and you'll hear us say this a lot, these are a step up from the likes of Land Cruiser and Patrol in terms of cabin space and amenity. And if you're buying these for the family for longer distance road trips, there really is nothing that comes close. In fact, on that point, let us know in the comments section below, when you're buying a full-size pickup like this, how much does the space and utility in the second row play into your purchasing decision? And lastly, before we go, don't forget that you can fold the seat bases up and open up a huge storage area across there as well. Back seat of the Silverado is not much different to the Ram in terms of the size, but one thing I would say is that the Ram probably seems and feels a little bit more bright and airy, I guess, because you've got a bigger sunroof in the Ram that comes further back into the second row. You do get one in the Silverado, but it's smaller and it's towards the front. So it doesn't feel quite as bright back here. Seat comfort, about the same. Room, very similar again. I mean, another enormous amount of room. Flat floor makes a difference as well because you can sort of move your legs around and not be impacted by a transmission hump through the center. So the actual comfort back here is very similar to Ram. You get cup holders up there. You get USB-A and USB-C, so not quite as many outlets as the Ram. You do get heated outboard seats again, and the air conditioning controls are there as well. Center console, very similar again. Doesn't have the storage hidey hole that the Ram gets, but it does have cup or bottle holders there. We also love these little guys here. There's these little, I guess you'd call them secret places to store things inside the seat backs there. They're really handy as well. And you can lift the base of the seat up, which stays up out of the way, and then you get these big storage buckets under here, which also, they're really handy for things that you need to carry around. Like if you're using the tow bar, for argument's sake, and you don't have it attached to the vehicle, you'd put that in there, your D-shackles, ratchet straps, things like that, that you wanted to keep out of the way. But once again, when it comes to comfortable touring, if you've got 4 or indeed 5 adults that you need to move around, nothing really gets close to this class of vehicle. It's one of the reasons they're so popular. And the comfort back here in the Silverado is just about even money with the Ram. Silverado tray first up, mate. Look at this. Look at this luxury. Why would you want to open your own tailgate ever again?
I know, it'll do it itself. That's quite amazing. But we do have a nice tub liner here.
Yeah.
There is an electric roller cover, but there is a problem with this, isn't there?
This is the second Silverado we've had, and the tray lid has been problematic. This is electric, you can use it with a remote. There's something a little bit wonky with the system and the way it works. So, look, to be fair, I don't know that I'd want an electric lid on mine, and we'll get to the Ram in a sec. I kind of prefer that manual fold. I don't know that I'd want an electric lid. I do like the fact that they have a spray-in bed liner, because that's robust. You've got a light in there, you've got some tie-downs. There's not a lot in there though, is there?
No, there is one more cool feature though, which I think is really cool.
Show me. So not only do you not have to put it down, you don't have to put it up either.
That is luxury.
Yeah.
So a classic thing for Ram is of course the Ram box, and it does come standard with this car. Pretty cool feature. I know not everyone loves it, but you've got this handy storage space which is lockable on the side here. You can drain it, you can put ice in it, and there's one on each side obviously, and it does affect the shape of the tub on the inside as well, which is worth pointing out.
Before we get to that though, side steps integrated into the bumper on the Silverado.
Yeah.
I quite like this one here.
A little bit nifty, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that.
That pops out, gives you a bit of room to reach in and grab some stuff from the back there.
Sturdy too.
Yeah, it is, definitely. And then you pull it away. Hang on. There we are. Off it goes.
You made that look beautiful.
That easy.
Yeah, yeah. Now this is also electric as well, drop down. There's no doubt the flexibility of this tray is better, right? Because
absolutely.
spray-in liner as well. I really like this particular lid. This is more like a classic tonneau with a hard frame around it. We've had these out in torrential rain and they don't leak.
Yes.
And I do like the way that they fold back. So you kind of reach in here and just drop that down over that side. And then you can flip it back over pretty easily, right? So what's good about that is it goes back into a 3-fold mechanism like that, which opens it right up. You can see though, like you said, where the Ram boxes encroach. But I do love that adjustable bracket that you get with the Rams as well, because what you can do is you can put it right back here, and then if you've got shopping and stuff that you want to put in that you don't want flying, you can keep it there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can extend that space as well a little bit into the tray if you need it. So you've got less tub space, I suppose, but it's more squared off, which is, it's usable. And then that divider is actually really handy for every day. So this is a cool setup, I think.
Absolutely right, mate. So really, it's a case of pick your poison. I guess overall, this is the slight winner. But if you want practicality, usability, features, go with the Ram.
Absolutely.
If you want space, go with the Silverado. Okay, so you don't buy these if you live in the city. We've already been over that. But one thing is very true, and we're in the Silverado at the moment, of both these trucks, which is the more you drive them, the more they kind of start to feel natural, I guess. They don't feel as big as they are, even though you are aware that they're a large vehicle. They're not as big from behind the wheel, certainly. You do have to be aware when you're turning corners to give yourself a little bit more room because of the long wheelbase, but that's the same if you've driven smaller trucks when you're towing, things like that. You'd get used to that. The engine and the drivetrain in general in this is really good. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's refined. The bimodal exhaust is good when you get into it because it sounds tough, but it's quiet at idle around town. And just in general driving in terms of ride comfort, cabin comfort, and the way this feels from behind the wheel, it's really, really quite impressive. You're going to hear us say this a few times throughout the course of this video, but the big ticket item with the new Ram 1500 is the inline 6-cylinder motor. 2 turbos, and it is a very, very smooth powertrain. This is a great thing to drive. Ride quality, bump absorption, insulation inside the cabin is very much on par with the Silverado. very, very hard to split them. If there is one thing to note about the cabin, it's probably a little bit more storage flexibility. And with this screen here in portrait orientation, it feels a little bit more modern, a little bit more up to date. But while that screen does look more modern, and there's something about the finish and the design that does look more up to date, it is a little bit more technical to use, especially when you're on the move, because there are physical buttons up the side, but there's less of them, and there's less dials and things, so you've got to touch the screen, which, as you'll hear us say quite often, is not quite as intuitive when you're on the move because you've got to look at what you're doing. But once again, as you'll find with the Silverado, the long distance touring capability, the ride quality and comfort, and the general just relaxed air inside the cabin here is fantastic. And of course, when you open that huge sun blind, it really lets a whole lot of light into the cabin, and it feels very, very airy in here. So a great place to spend your time if you're running around town like we are today, or you're going on a longer road trip.
In terms of fuel economy, the smaller and turbocharged Ram 1500 powertrain does give better claimed economy overall, with a figure of 10.7 litres per 100 Ks. In comparison, the V8-powered Silverado has a claimed consumption figure of 12.2 litres per 100, which is helped a little bit by some technology like cylinder deactivation. But clearly it's not able to match the Ram in terms of outright efficiency. In the real world, fuel consumption in our testing did put these two utes a bit closer together, however. The 6-cylinder Ram is more efficient, using around 13.5 litres per 100 Ks unladen, but that compared to around 14.5 to 15 litres per 100 for the Silverado. When you are towing, however, the efficiency gap between these utes shrinks to effectively zero. Now, we were towing a 2.5-tonne caravan along a highway with some big hills included, but we saw around 19 litres per 100 kilometres for both of these utes. In terms of towing credentials, obviously these two big utes offer next level capability in comparison to what you get with a regular sized four-wheel drive ute. That towing capacity, most notably, is bumped up to 4.5 tonnes in a braked capacity, but you do need to use a larger 70mm ball to access that extra capability. And for those who do want to tow more than 3 tonnes legally and easily, both of these utes are a really good option to do it. You've got an 863 kilo payload in the Ram, which is better than the 748 kilos of the Silverado, so that is a better choice for people who want to load up the tray of the vehicle. This is despite the fact that the Ram actually weighs a little bit more than the Chevy, but it's got a larger GVM, which gives you the ability to load the tray up even more. There's a higher gross combination mass with the Ram as well. You've got a 7,771 GCM here, which is notably bigger than the 7,160 kilo GCM of the Chevy Silverado. That means this Ram is in a better position to tow upwards of 3 tonnes up towards that 4.5 tonne limit more regularly.
The world's most unsurprising news is the fact that this Chevy Silverado 1500 is an excellent tow vehicle. We've got a big naturally aspirated V8 that's got a nice, smooth and linear delivery of torque, and the 10-speed automatic gearbox is excellent as well. So when you're towing, this engine just doesn't seem to get unperturbed. It does rev out a little bit more and fuel consumption does go up, but not stratospherically so. So with this 2.5 tonne caravan on the back at the moment, you still feel quite relaxed from behind the wheel. We've got leaf suspension in the back here. That is different to the coils in the Ram, and we'll see what the Ram is like in comparison later. But this handles the weight nicely. You could definitely load this up a lot more, I think, and be quite comfortable from behind the wheel. This is an excellent tow vehicle. Now, when you're towing at 100 kilometers an hour on the highway, you can feel perhaps a tiny little bit of jiggle in the suspension of this Silverado as it handles the weight of the car, but also the caravan and that tow ball downforce. But it's really to be expected, and that's doing 100 k's an hour, so that's a pretty big ask, I think, for most vehicles, and overall it does well. Now, one thing I do want to point out also is the use of the 360-degree camera system when you're driving and towing. You can put it into tow mode, and when you turn your indicators on, it'll actually throw up an image from the camera on the display in front of you here, and it helps you just have a bit more vision in terms of whether there's anything hiding in the blind spot behind you. It's a good use of technology, and it's definitely helpful when you're towing a lot. Now, they say there's no replacement for displacement, except for, of course, PSI. And by that, I mean turbocharging. Now, despite the fact that this engine is a little bit more than half the size of the Chevy Silverado, adding 2 turbochargers means it matches it for power and torque quite comfortably. And you'll notice that because we've got turbos here, peak torque is accessible a little bit lower in the rev range. So even though it's a smaller engine, it does have a nice relaxed demeanor. And that's even the case when you are towing. This thing revs a bit more, it revs fairly happily. Now, it doesn't have the same soundtrack. I've got to say, it does sound pretty good in its own right, but I think you could almost give this a bit of a level pegging feeling between the V8 and the inline 6. Now, that's the same for fuel economy as well, I've noticed. I was expecting this 6-cylinder engine to maybe have an economy advantage when you're towing, but that's not the case. They both use around 19 litres per 100 Ks. Now, the suspension is fairly close overall when it's loaded up. We do have coil suspension in the back here compared to the leaf suspension in the Silverado, but because you've got such a big long wheelbase and you have a relatively low payload between these two vehicles, that means the ride quality between the two is quite good, and they both handle the load in a similar manner. Now, one final point to add here is the fact that the Ram 1500 has an auto 4-wheel drive function, which can give you all-wheel drive on road, which can be beneficial, I think, for around town driving and towing. Now, it's not a fully smart, full-time 4-wheel drive system as you might get in a Land Cruiser, for example, but it is an advantage to have regardless.
All right, mate, let's wrap this up by first talking about the strong points of these vehicles, because we say this all the time. We'll say it again so nobody gets upset. If you live in the city, don't buy one.
Yes.
It's pretty simple. They're too big, nowhere to park them.
It's a square peg in a round hole.
Don't buy one.
Absolutely.
Now, if you don't live in the city and you do need a vehicle of this size, there are certain things that these do better than anything else. The cabin space is incredible. We both said that. Even things like 300 series and Patrol, nowhere near these in terms of cabin space. Tell me a little bit, though, again, and just remind everybody about the long-distance touring and the towing ability of these two.
Absolutely. Because you've got such a big vehicle, in both cases, with big wheelbases, these are impressively comfortable to spend long time in. Yeah. And that's especially the case with towing. If you're towing 2.5 or 3 ton, even with a 300 series Land Cruiser, for example, you're just a bit more anxious behind the wheel. These just do it wonderfully. Now, the difference between these two is probably closer than you'd imagine. You'd think that this smaller engine with turbos might have a bit more efficiency, but credit to the big V8, it does use its fuel quite well. So these were both averaging around the same amount, 19 litres per 100 with a 2.5 tonne Caravan on the back. So no, they're not super efficient, but they do it in a really, really nice composed way, which I think is important.
Yeah, the point you made there that I'd like to reiterate is relaxed. I think when you're towing, when you're out on the open road, these things are just very, very effortless from behind the wheel, effortless as a passenger, comfortable, quiet, refined, all of those things, and they really, really lap that up. So I think if you do tow a lot, if you're going to do a lot of long distance touring, there is no argument. This is the best way to do it. So we're at the point we get to with any of these comparisons, we have to pick a winner. It's your money. It's quite a fair wedge of money now too. Like we're getting up there with these two. They're not cheap classically, even though you do get a lot of vehicle for the money. If you've got to buy one, which one are you buying?
This is tough, and it's much closer than I thought. There are interesting spec differences here. This one's a little bit cheaper, but the spec comparison between the two, there's a lot of give and take. This one wins here, this one wins there. For me, I'm probably leaning towards this Chev because even though the Ram has a better interior layout in terms of overall space and storage, this thing is still massive on the inside. You've got a massive center console still. Yeah. I prefer a slightly more traditional layout on the inside, and the V8, I think there isn't a big advantage here. This has more torque and maybe a little bit more acceleration, but the relaxed demeanor of this car, the soundtrack, it just fits the bill really nicely. So that is an advantage for me still. You
make a great point. I think for me, I'm going for the V8 as well. The way I'd describe it along the lines of what you just said is the gap between the old Ram and the Silverado was centimetres. I think it's millimetres now. They're very, very close. For me, I'm going to take the Silverado as well. I do like the V8 engine. I just like the way it gets about its work, which is kind of what you said. I'm willing to accept in smaller segments you don't need a big engine, and that's where the 6 really comes into its own.
Absolutely.
Like I said though, test drive them both. If you love the Ram when you drive it, buy it because you will not be disappointed. Don't forget to hit like if you've enjoyed the video. Click on subscribe so you stay up to date with all of our latest video content. this comparison, all of our reviews, where are they, mate?
Drive.com.au. Plus, if you're looking for even more towing content, maybe you want something that's a little bit smaller than these two, check out this review up here of the Land Cruiser 300 series, a very popular option, of course, in Australia.